Hi everyone, Acesup here for PokerNerve. Thanks for joining me again. This MTT review will be focusing on final table play. And so we'll be picking up the action in the final table bubble of the 888 Poker Tornado. 888 Poker, by the way, is really good value. So if you aren't playing on there already, make sure you check it out. Use the link in the description below and you'll get $8 instantly free. And you can also get $8 incremental bonuses as you accumulate status points, which is actually quite easy. And you can earn up to $88 as well as getting to play in some soft tournaments. This tournament, however, is a $109 buy-in, not the softest. And so we'll see some really interesting hands and tactics that I hope will help you at your next final table. Getting into the action now, we have
Ace 8 in the big blind, and we have around M10. You can see the blinds and antes add up to close to 3,000. So there's 3,000 to start each hand. 1M equals 3,000. We've got around 30,000 M10. There's a couple of big stacks on the table, close to M20 stacks, and the short stack is Daisy on the button with M4. We see a very interestingly named Afraid Bubble player here, raised from UTG, but it is just six-handed. And we get the short stack calling. Hang on a minute. What's going on here? What's this call? What does it mean? There could be a big discrepancy in the range that we assign here, couldn't there? I mean, if it's a regular, they're going to have pretty close to the nuts because good players aren't going to speculate in the bubble with a short stack. They're not going to call with small pairs or suited connectors. They're going to have pretty close to the nuts. On the other hand, if it's a recreational player, sure, they might have, in particular, I think a lot of Broadway combinations. Your Jack Queen, King Queen, maybe a King 10 suited or 9 10 suited, and maybe even an Ace 9. It could also be the fact that they're being a bit cautious in the bubble because they want to make the final table. That could be possible if they are a recreational player. They might have that sort of mentality. Having said that, I think it's a little bit reckless here to pump it up with the Ace 8. At M10, if we 3-bet to fold, we'll be risking a fair amount of our stack. It would look very strong. And I think jamming is just a little bit over the top there. And so, especially since Afraid Bubble has raised from, UTG. So let's just call getting over 6-1 pot odds and proceed post-flop. Checks around. It's a bad board for us. And the king, even though we pick up a gut shot, it's just a board that's, I would think, has hit their ranges pretty hard. And it's interesting, though, that the flop did check around, but let's just check here. And we do see that, we get a bet and a jam from Daisy. What do you think they've got? I think Daisy could easily have maybe even a King Jack here, a King 10. Maybe it's not impossible that they are still trapping, I guess, with aces. And I think Afraid Bubble is very likely to have Ace King, King Jack, something like that as well. And we see Kings and Jack Queen. So they were both thought they were slow playing on the flop. Afraid Bubble, I don't mind that check on the flop too much because we're in the big blind. We've got a pretty wide range. So we could have a weak holding that's missed that board. They don't really mind letting us sort of catch up a little bit to get some value on later streets. And I think a lot of the time they're just going to find, though, that the main reason is just that they're going to find Daisy just jams on the button, I think, because she's so short. If she's got any piece at all, she might just jam once she sees two checks that look weak. And instead, she was trapping with top two, but, she was ahead on the flop, wasn't she? But got a bit unlucky there. Lucky on the flop, unlucky on the turn. And so we lose Daisy, and we move along here with the 3-9. We fold through that jam there. 6-8 here. This is a spot where if I had a big stack and we could get leverage, I might consider applying pressure on the button here on a final table bubble. But we are not in that situation because we're an M9-ish now, so our opponents can actually kind of put a bit of pressure on us, can't they? Speaking of pressure, we see Afraid Bubble here with the 3-bet from the small blind. And a call, which is kind of interesting. I guess Nutty is around M, sort of close to 20 at the start of the hand, so they probably wouldn't want to get in too light a range. And also the big blind flat is a little bit suspicious. They could easily have a strong hand. I think a lot of the time that flat from the big blind is like nines or king queen suited, maybe ace jack, something like that. Something that doesn't quite want to jam in all the beans, but feels obliged to see a flop, especially in position against the 3-better. However, they are now the meat in the sandwich because Nutty does call. I think with what we just said about possible ranges here, any of these players could actually have a jack in their hand. But it's interesting that it goes check, check, check again. We saw a frayed bubble check an overpair last hand. Bet on the turn and a call and then check, check. And we see a frayed bubble has an overpair again, running good, kings and then aces, two hands later. So, and happened to run into ace queen. Probably could have got more value there. I understand why Nutty doesn't necessarily want to get it in pre, but I do think it's really close because he's got, well, I mean, he could be against pretty wide ranges. You would presume the big blind would 4-bet ace king, would probably jam or at least 4-bet ace king there. So you presume that you're probably ahead of the big blind's flatting range there. And a frayed bubble is just 3-betting against what could easily be perceived as a steal from the small blind, the most common 3-betting position at the table, isn't it? Because players don't want to call and get squeezed by the big blind or don't want to be playing out of position post-flop. So they often try to take the pot down initially and take initiative as well. So I wouldn't hate a jam there by Nutty, but I do think just calling is okay because you are kind of deep. But having said that, the pot is already pretty big. You've already got 20,000 out there in dead money, and you probably have the best hand a decent amount. But not this time because they were crushed by aces. Had aces bet the flop, aces probably would have got a full double up, but I understand why they might check there, I guess. But, well, I mean, I think checking here is better than the last one. Just because the board is a little bit more of a lockdown board, isn't it? I mean, even if your opponent happens to have king 10, I mean, they can't hit an ace and get a straight because you fill up. A lot of the time they're going to have something like king queen, which only has 2 outs to fill up. And if they have got a jack, well, it's just bad luck, you're crushed. But they might have 10s or 9s. So I guess checking here by a frayed bubble, they're probably thinking that, well, I'm going to get a couple of streets value from queen X anyway. And if I'm against 9s or 10s, it's going to be hard to get value from that hand. So if I check flop, it looks weak. Maybe I can get a street or 2 of value on the later streets, and it just helps protect a checking range as well. It's good to have some strong checks. You might check aces and queens, or I guess sometimes ace jack and so forth. Just give your opponents an opportunity to make big mistakes on the later streets. I would have just probably just a bit small in the flop. Tried to get a queen king, queen 10 suited, or 10s or something, 9s to call. But if I do check flop and bet turn, I think that I would probably have blasted. Well, I didn't have the ace of clubs. I thought he had the ace of clubs. I think if you have the ace of clubs on the river, you should bet because there's just less flushes that your opponent's going to have. If you've got the ace of clubs, then what flush would they have? Although they did open and then call a 3-bet. So I guess they might have a little bit of a wider range. Like I guess they could have 8-9 of clubs, 9-10 of clubs, king 10 of clubs. I guess they could have those hands because they were getting really good odds to call in position and complete the action. So I guess that is a little bit of a scare card on the river. Okay, so these first few hands have gone a bit slow, haven't they, guys? But I thought they were quite interesting. But normally I'll just be going through the hands that we are involved in. I'll just sort of skim through these other hands unless they seem quite interesting. King Queen, open and take it down. See I open and a jam there. Fold the King 2. Interesting that a frayed bubble folded in the big blind. Just want to keep your eyes out for things like that. Who's giving up their big blind? Especially to min raisers. I think on that board, once we open on the button, we're just better off c-betting it. The reason why I think that's, even though we have the best hand a lot and we're not really going to get called by worse very often, I think there's a lot of merit just to denying your opponent of any equity they have. So if our opponent had, let's just say they had Queen 7 of spades, they've got some equity against us. They can pick up a spade or they can pick up a queen and get the best hand. The board might develop. If the turn's a 10 and they bet 2/3 pot, it puts us in a little bit of a tricky spot if the turn is, say, a 10 of diamonds. So I think this is just fine, just a bet. And we might get sometimes called by a worse ace, like if they've got ace 5 of spades or something. I guess that's impossible. But I do think that it's probably okay just to be betting there and just, like I said, you just deny your opponent any equity. Any pot share they had, they're just going to be giving it up most of the time because the board is so dry. Ace King. Come on, baby. And we see the big 3-bet here by Nutty. Put in a third of their stack. Not too much to think about. Let's go for it. Come on, Ace King. Oh, there is the ace on the river. Oh, chop that one up, people. Chop that one up. 9-3 here. Gonna fold that. I won't be folding many big blinds, but 9-3 I will be folding. Okay, so Afraid Bubble does defend this one and donk bets. Donk bets on 5-7 queen. And then bets river. I guess they could have Jack Queen. I guess they might have a hand. Well, I mean, I would have thought that if they had diamonds, they might barrel turn. Because the ace is a pretty good scare card. It feels kind of like they've got either a hand like 6-9 or 4-6 that maybe just bet flop hoping to get a fold, but now they feel like they can rep a flush. Or they've got Queen Jack. I guess they could have a hand like... Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense, actually. They did have the flush, yeah. They had 6-8 as well. I'm really surprised that they didn't bet the turn there. If I had 6-8 of diamonds, I would just smash the turn. Because you might fold out a hand like, for example, 7-8 suited that's opened, or even a hand that's open like Queen 10 is on a fair bit of pressure on the turn. A Queen is probably not going to fold, but you can at least put them under pressure and try. But the hands in particular that I want to fold out, like if they've got jacks, I don't think they can call turn. If they've got 10s, 9s, 8s, I don't think they can call turn if you make a big bet. Even though it looks a little bit suspicious because you've donk bet flop, and then the scare cards come and you're firing again, you're repping a pretty thin range. It looks very drawery. But at the same time, it's still hard to call on the final table bubble if you're sitting there with pocket 9s and just hoping your opponent has just gone a bit mad and bluffing. I don't hate the donk bet. I myself would have check raised this hand and then just smash turn, but donk betting is not the worst play. I generally don't do a lot of betting out of position. I mostly do a lot of check raising. As you guys who have seen any of my recent live streams would have seen a check raising frenzy out of position. Check raising as much as we can. Open here with the ace-6 suited. We get a very, very dry board again, don't we? So I think for all the same reasons before that we bet, we can bet again. I can't remember these hands, by the way, guys. So if I say, like, I think someone's got, you know, ace-9 of diamonds, and they do have ace-9 of diamonds, it's just a miracle guess. We're virtually just looking at this together. This was played a week ago, but I've played so many tournaments in between then and now that this is just like a whole new tournament again to me. Just so you guys know. I'm not like cheating and pretending to be like the ultimate hand reader when I put someone on a hand and they turn it over. Or if they don't turn it over, then I'm probably just a fish. But yeah, just so you guys know. We're going through this together and we're sharing this extreme pocket 7s jam together. Well, it's not really extreme, is it? I mean, we've got a cut-off open here. They could very easily be stealing. I think that we have seen this player open a couple of times already too, a few times. And so I think when they're at an M... What is that? There's 3.4k in there each round now, each hand. So they've got around an M of 7-ish, 7.5. So they could definitely still be opening to fold. And in any case, we've got a hand with great raw equity, and we can apply pressure in the final table bubble. What do I mean about raw equity? Well, pocket sevens does well as an all-in hand against a range that might call us there, but it's not a hand that has what we call smooth equity distribution. It doesn't flop well. It only really flops well when it hits a set, which, as you guys know, only happens about 11% of the time. So let's just keep things simple there and pick up all that delicious dead money that was out there. Love dead money. Tastes like chicken. Pocket nines here, and we have an M of 11. I'm not going to go into too much detail here about why I limp. It's part of my small blind strategy, so that could be a whole video, take up a whole video in itself. But you can check out my streams, or you can go to the PokerNerve VIP channel and see a lot of limping discussion. But for now, let's just say that I would limp a lot of hands at this stack size, and so I don't want to be too unbalanced and have a whole lot of trashy hands that I limp and just raise all my big hands. So I'm going to be limping some strong hands as well. This is obviously a really strong hand for the situation, isn't it? And I think because Afraid Bubble, we have seen sort of play a few hands, and that it is the final table bubble, they could very easily raise here. We could get a hand like King 2 or some really weak hand like 8-5 that's just going to raise to try and get us to fold. And we can get them to put more money in the pot that way. At the same time, we can get really nice flops like this if they do check back. And now we have a really disguised hand. Speaking of check raising out of position, not too surprisingly, check raise. Yeah, so I really like this play actually. I think it's much better than... I mean, I think c-betting is fine as well, but I think this is quite nice to have this sort of hand, because when you are blind versus blind, it doesn't really look very believable, this check raise, does it? I mean, what is your opponent limping with and then check raising with on a 3-4-6 board heads up here, blind versus blind? Do you really have you limped with like 3-6, 4-6? Do you have 5-7? Have you limped with 5-7? And so I think opponents in this spot are often going to just spaz out. At the same time, this is a hand that's pretty vulnerable. If we just c-bet, and a lot of the time my c-bet on the flop after I've limped, it's just a stab. You know, it's just like a min bet. So we'd just be popping out 1600 here. And so rather than doing that and giving our opponent a great price to peel in position and see how the board develops. I mean, any 2, 5, 7, I guess 8, spade, 10, jack, queen, king, ace is all bad for us, potentially. Either immediately bad or just equity-wise. Our opponent can pick up a lot of equity and also just put us in difficult situations on later streets. So I don't mind just trying to end the hand quickly here. We create a little bit of extra aggressive dead money by letting our opponent bet. We get the opportunity to end the hand quickly. And just get more money in the pot with what's presumably the best hand a lot of the time. And our opponent just sticks it in our eyeball. How about that? Ace is up. Pow. You got to remember, in this situation, as I said, what ranges are still pretty wide. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this with a hand like King 5, 4, 5, 3, 5, 6, 8, Queen 6, even maybe a hand like King 4 might just say, hey, I'm going to get the money in. As well as all, I did say King 5 like a flush straight draw, but as well as all the flush draws. I mean, they could have, 10 deuce of spades. Remember that we've just limped in pre-flop. So their range is XX. And I think against their range that would be willing to get it in on this board, we're doing well. Let's just say well. We're not doing excellent. Like, he could have some 2 pairs of straights. It's not impossible. He could have like, 7-4 of spades, which has great equity against us. But I think we're doing well, especially once we check raise, and it makes the situation quite easy for us because now we only have to call another 28,000. That's the effective stack. That's our stack that we've got behind. We are going to just call it off. And I want to see a hand like 6-7 here. You know, I don't want any scary stuff like King Deuce of Spades or anything scary. Uh-oh. Oh. King 6. All right. Give us the money. So we got our opponent to get in his whole stack there with 5 outs. 5 outs from the flop times 4. about 20%. We had about 80% equity there. He did have backdoor spades though. Let's give him an extra five bonus for that. So we were about 3-1 favorite. We were about 75% there, and yeah, I mean that's just a good situation that's been created from the fact that we've limped there and played the hand nice post. So we move on, and now we have a stack to play with. So kind of a strategy there has paid off. It is a little bit of a risk sometimes, limping, but as long as you're playing okay post-flop, making good decisions, you can get rewarded for your limps sometimes. I'm talking about blind versus blind, obviously, because, I mean, some players would just raise the nines there, but I personally do go for a limp. And I personally do go for a c-bet here, because we've got up and down, and I like my sizing, I think. What was the SPR here on the flop? He does fold. Let's just take a look at the SPR. So SPR 4. So when you've got an SPR 4, you want to bet pretty small if you plan to barrel, or you can go pretty big if you want to barrel 2 streets. Normally in this spot, what's going through my mind is what part of his range are we trying to fold out? So he is the big blind, so he could have 6-7, 9-6, King 9. You could have 7-Jack suited. He might even have like 10-6 suited. So he could have diamonds. He could have a hand like ours. So what I'm really thinking is there's a lot of hands that we can fold out. I mean, even if he had 10-6 and say that the turn is like say the turn was an ace and we barrel again, he's even going to be under pressure with like the top of his range. Well, I mean, he can have straights, I guess it's not top of his range, but you know what I mean. Strong hands, we can put a lot of pressure on. So in situations like that where we're against wide ranges and we can apply a lot of pressure, I like to go ahead and do that in situations where we have a lot of equity, which we do here with 2 overs and the straight draw. So I think we want to be betting, and I think betting here we could go, I mean, you could even bet like 6,000 or 7,000 on the flop, and then if he calls, there's going to be 22 on there on the turn, and you could probably just shove and you'd have an SPR of close to 1, and you can put pressure on him that way. Or you can bet smaller, around 3,000 like I did, and then if he calls, there'll be 14 on the turn, and you can bet about 5.5, and then if he calls, there'll be 25,000 in there on the river, and he will have, by that stage, he'll have about 23-ish left, so it's almost an SPR of 1 on the river again when you jam. That's probably the way I usually prefer with this sort of hand to do it, because it's a more convincing story when you 3-barrel, and it also just allows for more, especially if he doesn't fast play and just check raise flop, then a lot of the time that he won't have draws like big flush draws and stuff. So there's a lot more scare cards that we can use to apply pressure on him. I mean, imagine he's got Jack 9 there, and then the turn's a 5, and he calls a turn bet, and then the river's an ace of diamonds, and he checks and we shove. Like, he's just in a world of pain with his Jack 9. He's probably going to fold it, and we're going to pick up the pot. And that's the way I like to do business, even on weekends. King 5 folding. King 5. It's the deja vu. We just say King 5 and King 5. Deweys. Couple of Deweys here. Limp. 3-4-10. Pretty dry board. And this time I do opt to just lead small, and he folds. We have the bigger stack than him now. We can put pressure. Raising pre-flop is fine as well, and asserting pressure in the bubble. But it is a bit the shoe is on the other foot now, and now we have the big stack. There's a little bit less to incentivize him from going after us there, and especially on that board. So I think that was okay, especially in that situation where our hand needed a lot of protection. We see the jam here, and the call. And Ace King gets that one. Afraid bubble. Short. Jack 7 I folded. 3-4. And we see the end of Afraid bubble. Ta-da! Final table. Okay, and we have Pocky 10s to start things off. I like where this is going. Oh, we see a roll. We see a wall. It's actually a bit scary, isn't it? We see a raise here and a call. This is a bit confusing. This is a little bit like that situation we saw before with Daisy,